So welcome everyone. We are back with Office Hours with Lisa Wang, which is a bi-weekly series of AMA-style virtual office hours. These live sessions are hosted by Alice and PepsiCo. So Alice is a free website helping business owners start and grow their companies. And PepsiCo's WomanMade initiative is supporting female founders with peer-to-peer mentorship and access to tools, relevant content, and expert guidance. So for support in your business and access to the recording after the session, join the free WomanMade community on helloalice.com. Lisa Wang, our host for these office hours, is the founder and CEO of SheWorx. And this week, Lisa is joined by Kate Carney, the founder of Kate Carney Consulting and a partner at Gray Legal, to discuss the topic of how to grow from founder to CEO and lead at scale. So at any time during this session, please feel free to drop in your questions using the Q&A function you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Lisa, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Welcome everyone to today's live female founder office hours. I know there's a lot of you here who are joining us on Zoom as well as on Facebook. So feel free to just type in your questions. I'm super excited to have everyone here who's part of the community at WomanMade. And I'm here today with Kate Carney. She's the founder of Kate Carney Consulting and a partner at Gray Legal. She's worked with so many female entrepreneurs and helping them scale their businesses. And she will be talking about how to grow from that role as founder to actually being a CEO and leading a scalable team. So especially if you're just starting your business and understanding what it is like to think about building a team and what sorts of processes you need to put in place, Kate and I will do our best to share our insights around your questions today. All right, before we get started, I'll keep talking, but please just type in the chat where you're tuning in from, what city, and your name. So as you guys type that in the chat box, I want to say a quick thank you to PepsiCo for making these office hours possible and Alice for hosting us. This is going to be a really engaging hour, and we're going to learn a lot of things. So, hey Camille, great to see you from Boston Lake, New York. And as you guys hear interesting things, just feel free to Instagram us at PepsiCo. I'm at Lisa Wang Wins and helloalice.com. Any sort of interesting nuggets or knowledge or quotes, we would love to hear what you find valuable. Hey, Alex from NYC. We've got Anna from San Francisco. We've got Kamika from Douglasville, Georgia. Diana, who's tuning in from Philly. I just met Diana yesterday at Temple University where I was speaking. So Diana, I'm really glad that you're here with us today. And all right, without further ado, I'm joined here today by Kate Carney. Kate is an experienced business consultant. She's a lawyer and strategic advisor. And today she helps scale businesses and empower female founders with game-changing ideas and encourages investment by women and in women. So she works with clients and takes a founder-centric approach to performance, focusing on culture, talent, and organizational design. So we're really thinking about how do you hire the right people and create a systemized process. As a complement, she also serves as legal counsel to startups from formation to exit. So I'm super excited today to be talking to Kate. And at any point, just feel free to share your questions. So Kate, turning it over to you, I just want you to kick us off by telling us what gets you most excited about the female-founded companies you work with, and what you're looking for in terms of those future women that you want to support.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Lisa. So I look for passion, right? I think it's about making and helping women build businesses that they're passionate about, help them make the money they deserve, look for those game-changing ideas, like I said, and really anybody who's looking to scale a business. You know, we all know the stats about dollars going in, VC dollars going into women businesses, women sort of stalling out in their ability to scale, and I want them to be able to scale and make those revenues. So, you know, anybody I'm willing to work with that's got a passion and wants to build their business.
Awesome. So to get us started, I know that a lot of the women tuning in are in somewhat early stages of their business. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see founders making in the early stages when they're still in that sort of founder role where they're wearing multiple hats?
Sure. So when you're early stage, I think the big questions are, I hate to say from a lawyer's perspective, but you could go to a lawyer way too late and people start downloading documents online or get forms that they're not really sure what they mean and they start filling them in and down the road something comes up and you've got to sort of redo what they're doing. So I think, for the plug of legal, it's important to have lawyers from the beginning. I also think it's important to have accountants from the beginning. Those two will sort of get you through those beginning stages. I think early on, you're moving 1,000 miles an hour and there's information coming at you from every direction. And basically you're usually just sitting there trying to put out fires all the time. And so some of the big picture things you need to be focused on to grow a business get sidelined. And very quickly something like culture goes astray. You've got a culture early when you start out, it's all an extension of you, the people, the culture, how things get done, it's all you. But as you start to grow and add one person, two people, five people, it becomes a different animal. And I think that some founders lose their attachment to those people and to their culture.
Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about culture then, what is a high performing culture? What are some aspects?
Yeah, I say a high performing culture is like a culture that's engaged, it's collaborative, it's innovative, there's good communication, and there's accountability. Those are sort of the pillars I think are a high performing culture that are going to deliver performance beyond your expectations. And when we're talking just the level set, when we're talking about culture, I think about, how teams interact and how the work gets done in the business.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some tangible examples of that? Like what are some of the systems that people do put in place early on?
I think a lot of it's around the collaboration. I think there's twofold. The first is for the individual to grow. It's important to tie the strategic objectives that you've set out to their actual function and role. Very specifically, tell them how they fit into the bigger picture and the strategy. Companies that set out specific measurable performance targets are helpful. When people reach those targets, rewarding that behavior is helpful. I also think in terms of culture, it's an everyday thing, and it's you as a leader, you're modeling it from the top, you're living and breathing it. Things like group meetings or one-on-ones, two-way feedback, ways to communicate and give opinions and have your ideas be heard is a collaborative culture.
Can you give us a tangible example, perhaps even with one of your past clients, before and after, and what you really did to assess the problem and then bring in a solution?
Sure. So one of my clients, it was sort of a combination of everything that I say goes wrong. The founder, and we'll get to the founder doesn't transition well to the role of a CEO, and all the information became very siloed. He held on to all the decision making. There was nobody empowered, and it was a very flat structure, and communication and information didn't flow either which way. And so the culture, just everyone started to feel like they didn't have a role. They didn't have any input in anything. Why bother? It became a very passive environment. And so some of the things we did were as basic as, I think for young startups, a hierarchy, a chart, an organizational chart, roles and responsibilities. As you start to grow, what are people responsible for? What are people not responsible for? Who do they report to and who do they talk to? So we put in place a structure and made sure everybody was on board with what their task was and understood it, and that they had feedback to what their task was. And then we implemented bi-weekly meetings that were by phone. The founder had to participate because we had a founder that didn't want to show up all the time. Had to pay attention, get off your phone, listen, ask open-ended questions, and ask for feedback. We also set up that he had to have one-on-one meetings weekly with one member of management or one functional head a week. A designated time, whether that was coffee or not, but it was designated. Everyone could be prepared for that conversation, and he could understand what was going on in different segments.
Got it. And what was the result of all of that afterwards?
I think the biggest is information flowed a lot better, which meant projects were getting done. People were actually talking about, I'm doing this over here, you're impacted by X or Y over here. And so therefore projects were being done faster, more efficiently, and getting to actual results instead of people working on different things that ended up being conflicting.
Okay, cool. So as you look at some of the female founders that are coming in to work with you, what would you say some of their biggest challenges are? Why do they end up working with you?
Sure. I think women, to generalize, have different challenges than men sometimes, not always, but I think we know that the funding is one major issue. I think the other one sometimes is this, I find them ready to scale, but not sure how to. And so there's this hesitation, and there's a hesitation, let's say, on hiring a senior person, right? As you scale, you need senior people around you. Oftentimes they're hiring that person too late. I think there's this fear of what happens if I pick the wrong person? This is a very expensive hire. I'm giving up some control. I'm not comfortable. It's that leap of faith that you trust your gut, you've asked the right questions, and you're moving on. So I think sometimes it's that decision making, believe in your gut, make the decision, take the risk, and you will adapt for whatever outcome that there is. I think there's also the question of mentorship and networks. That networks are essential to your success, whether that's in connections that you're making, in filling gaps in your skill set, in mentorship for how to be a greater leader. Men tend to be part of established networks, and women do not have the same networks, maybe don't have the same time to dedicate to building networks, oftentimes balancing home life or taking care of elderly or whatever that combination is. They feel like their time is stretched, and so fitting in time to build a network doesn't always happen. But that's, you need the role models, and you need the people to turn to that have done this before, and the ecosystem is still growing. And I think I'm positive about where it's growing. You've got more and more successful women. You've got unicorns, you've got Rent the Runway, Glossier. So you've got people who are doing it and doing it well to turn to. But I think those are some of the things that are more specific to women coming in. And I want to be that supportive right hand that gives them both the consulting piece for the business, but also coaches them as a person and gets them to that leadership stage and help them find the right people to talk to.
Okay, awesome. So when it comes to the actual team building part of it, I know a lot of founders have questions around equity and compensation, especially in that early stage where people are overlapping perhaps in some of the tasks that they're doing. What do you typically recommend if someone were to bring on a co-founder down the line? Like, what sort of split does that look like? At what point do you have that conversation, and when do you go actually seek to speak to a lawyer about those documents?
I think when it comes to, let's say, a co-founder and you start those discussions, have discussions back and forth between yourselves of what you actually want it to look like. And those are tough conversations. Who gets to decide what in what circumstances? What kind of equity split do you want? There is that notion, I have the idea, it's my baby, I deserve to keep most of the equity. But sometimes for those founders, let's say, that don't transition well to be a CEO, they have the idea, they're bringing on somebody who's going to do all the work, and they're going to kind of take a executive chairman type role, then you may be giving up a lot more equity than you would if they're coming in a support role later and you've already done a lot of the scaling and the growth. So I think it's the timing of when the person comes in, what roles and responsibilities they're going to have. And then as soon as you start discussions, bring in lawyers. I hate to say that a number of projects I work on are founder disputes. And in every case, there's, if you're an LLC, it's an operating agreement you have that doesn't deal with what happens when things go wrong. What happens if you get to that pass where one person says yes and one person says no, and there is no tie break, and you no longer can work together, and you can't make decisions, so the business can't move forward. Do you have a provision in your document that shows how somebody can buy out the other one so you can actually move forward? So you get a lot of founder disputes where there's no document in place to tell you how to deal with it. And so it becomes very emotional. I think the founder discussions are extremely emotional. People are very tied to the business themselves, and a lawyer will also help you be more objective. Here's what's on the table. Let's find, the compromise that makes sense. This is why, as a business, it makes more sense than, something very personal between them.
And what are some of those options that you should be actually considering putting, like provisions you should be putting in your documents?
you should be paying attention to who has voting power, and that means on what items. So normally we'll split out a number of different actions that managers can take. So if you've, let's say you've appointed one of your co-founders as the managing member, so they're going to make the day-to-day decisions. We'll list out generally, but enough of a specific list that it's clear, these are the things that they're responsible for. One thing you can do is put thresholds in. So manager can borrow money up to $500,000, but everything over that requires both of you to make a decision. Managers may decide compensation for somebody up to $150,000, but anything above that requires. So you can put thresholds in that limit the manager's ability to act without the other member. And as you start to grow numbers of members, you pick things that we'll split it out to what managers can do, what requires a majority vote, and what requires a unanimous vote. Something unanimous would be like selling the business or entering into a merger or dissolving. But you want to break out who's got what powers and how. Like I said, you want a buy-sell provision in there that somebody can force the other one to buy their business or that they will buy it. So if you get to that point where it's a stalemate and nobody can do anything at this point, you put in an offer and say, I will buy your business. And if they turn it down, they have to buy yours. So that's one way to get both founders out of an agreement that they have. Those are probably the biggest things you should be thinking about in terms of splits. Obviously, as you get more members and owners in your business, there are things you can do with having two classes of shares. And sometimes one class will have voting rights and one class will not have voting rights. So you can split up rights. When you start having advisors or employees come in, you may want different rights between them.
Mm-hmm. And what are your thoughts on a 50-50 partnership?
It's a tough partnership to have, right? I think that you end up in those stalemate situations. Now, the argument I've heard, and I think it makes sense, is if we're both co-founders, this is our idea, it's our baby together, then we shouldn't be taking any action that we both don't agree on. So if we can't get on the same page, then it's an action we should not be taking, which works for some time. And I think if everyone thinks everything's going swimmingly, then that's a good place to be. When things start to go wrong, or there starts to be big differences of opinion, it leaves you unable to act. So I know, a company that grew to be large and billions of dollars, it started out with a couple and they did not stay together. And obviously over the years, they saw very different points of view. And that became a legal disaster and it went all the way to the courts, but they could not get themselves out of the arrangement and they were 50-50. And so it can go wrong. But if you both started the business and you want 50-50, put in some provision that somebody can buy the other party out. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you ended up at a stalemate on some things and then the business can't move forward. And have things like, silly things like, you're making a decision, somebody has to respond, everyone has to respond within 24 hours. So you can't have a partner who just goes missing for a week and you can't take any action because they didn't vote on something. They don't vote within 24 hours, you can take the vote and decide something yourself. Little things like that can help as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's so important to consider these things while it's going well, right?
Yes. Sometimes it's a little too late when everything is gone very badly.
Yeah. And moving from the partner level to the, let's say you're bringing on a key person on your team. You may not necessarily have raised enough capital to pay them the full salary that you want to or that they're expecting. Talk to me about the way to compensate someone at that level at the early stage.
Sure. So at that point, for the most part, we say options are a great way to go. You can offer an employee a salary that you can afford, and then some number of options that vest over time. So that means they have to stick around for, usually it's 4 years, and they vest yearly. And that encourages them to stick around to see them vest. It gives time for the business to build value. And so there's some value in those options. And it's a good way to compensate and make them attached to the business, right? The success of the business impacts the value of what they're holding. And so they're much more attached and aligned with your interests. Certainly options are tough in the sense that valuing what they will be, what that means in 3 to 5 years is difficult. So anybody taking that compensation package is taking a risk at the same time. And certainly there are those who that's too risky, but it is a normal process for startups to have to give a combination of options and salary. And you could do bonus structures as well. You can, that third layer, you can certainly tie bonuses to certain metrics, if it's sales or number of subscribers or some other metric that's really important to the business. You can tie it to that. We've also seen folks tie a bonus to the next round of funding. So, you know, you're going to get some amount of payment at the next round of funding that is at least X number of dollars, so that you're just delaying your cash payment. So those are some ways you can compensate somebody from the beginning. And the amount of options you give is going to depend on how senior the role is and obviously how critical they are to the business at that time.
Awesome. Cool. So just a question or a challenge from Diana, who is working on a foreign language public speaking, coaching, consulting, and online language immersion platform. Okay. And she said one of her bigger challenges is getting sponsorship. So while she's getting a lot of mentorship, she's not getting a lot of sponsorship to get things started. So she clarified that there's a great HBJ, Harvard Business Journal, article that says women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Men tend to get mentored, sponsored, and coached, but women tend to only get mentored/advice. No one high up on the rope with power pulls them up with an opportunity. What are your thoughts on this? Agree.
Agree. I mean, I think there's that article and a number of articles have been written that inside an organization, women are not advocated for or sponsored to help lift them up or give them the opportunity, get them in front of a meeting, get them to a conference, give them the opportunity to present. Nobody is advocating for them for their opportunities. There's certainly, and you have a lot of formal mentoring programs that don't really move the needle one way or another. So I would agree. I think that's also why trying to build that network is so important as a female founder, right? You'll find mentors and you'll find peer networks, which are extremely valuable, but really starting to dig for somebody who's going to advocate for you if it's looking for funding or strategic partners or, you know, with a partner you need or whatever the case may be, somebody who's going to stand up for you, those are hard to find. And those take a lot of networking and a lot of time, but they're not going to stand up. I agree with her. It doesn't happen, unfortunately.
Yeah. So as we think about now we're at the point where we've got a founder, like co-founder, we've got maybe a few key employees. What really happens next? And at what point does a founder have to consider, this is no longer just the key team and now we're really scaling?
Sure. I think as soon as you have the first few accomplishments, you've hit the first few metrics, you've gotten the market fit, you've gotten some traction, and now you're looking to scale that first stage and you're moving from 10 employees to 25 employees in that sort of range, and you're going from a small team that's very connected to you and you're moving to a larger team. And at that point, when you're scaling and you're bringing on people, I think the biggest mistake, or how I think about it, is it has to go from being your baby to being a business. And that's a very different mindset. And you have to shift your mind to understanding and seeing it as a business and not something that's very personal to you. And that means understanding that the role has changed entirely. So you were heads down, hustling, in the weeds, doing everything yourself, the center of it all, alongside your team every day, putting out fire drills. And then all of a sudden, your role is much more elevated. And it's about strategy. It's about culture. It's hiring and developing a team. It's being the connection to stakeholders. It's starting to make sure processes are put in place. That's really your role. It's to lead and manage, not execute and be the ideas person only. And that's a hard transition for many people to make. That's very hard. And it's competencies that most founders don't have. Quite frankly, most people don't have all of those competencies at one time. And so it's important to hire strategically for those skill sets that you don't have. Be super honest with yourself about what you are good at and what you're not good at, and sort of fill those skills gaps. This is where your network can be really helpful to help you transition into a leader and become a leader and answer some of those bigger strategic financial questions that you have, and you need somebody to bounce that idea off of. And that's sort of the role I like to try to take, is I'm your sounding board, and let's talk through the big decisions you have to make so that you feel confident that you have the information you need and you can make that decision. But that's a very hard transition, and it's a slow one. And it's, I say it's a growth mindset, right? You've got to believe that you can take on the new role with enough hard work and enough learning and enough opinions from other people that you can step in, and where you can't fill the shoes, you have to hire somebody to fill those shoes.
Definitely. And what do you think about consultants or freelancers, and what's the best way to manage those types of people?
So I think freelancers are key, right? Outsourcing what you can outsource at the beginning when you don't have the money to bring someone on full time, I think is a great way to get work done. Outsourcing also frees your time up. So as much as you can get something off your plate as you're making that transition so that that role is more efficient, I think outsourcing is a great way. I say outsource and automate. Those two things will get you to the place where you can be more of a CEO and out of the weeds as a person. Certainly it requires a different level of management of those people. A lot of times they're not in the office. So how do you manage remote workers? They have a lot of freedom, so you do have to check in sometimes, I think, more than not, and keep them on task. But there are great ways to find outsourced resources, and they're very good. Consultants, I think, can be very helpful, for areas you don't want to hire in because you don't have the money. So the key functions that you need that are critical to your day-to-day, to scaling, to building your product, your technology, to the service, to the sales cycle, whatever it is, what's key to your business, hire internally, because they will start to understand your business, they'll deep dive, they'll be a team player, and that's great. Something that's ancillary to your business and is a nice to have and you need it, but it doesn't live or die on it, you can hire a consultant for. And there's mixed bag, right? There are folks that are VC backed, and certainly VCs are very conscious of where money is spent. And so they want to know a consultant adds true value, and you should be asking yourself those same questions, but they can be a very useful way of not bringing someone on full time. It's also a great way to test people. So if you don't want to bring on somebody full time, but you say, I'm going to bring on a consultant for 3 months with a possible extension, let's see if this works out. If it works, you can hire them. It's a good way to test run a lot of people. So I think they're a useful way to go.
Cool. Camille wants to know what ways you would recommend finding outsourced resources or consultants.
I think, again, it goes to your network. If you have a need, you can send it out to networks, belong to female founder networks like this, and ask and throw it out there. I need somebody who does X, Y, Z. I know a lot of startups I work with use Upworks to find outsourced graphics and other folks. So that's a great resource, and they've had good experience with that. But it's asking your network. It's asking your lawyer if they know people. They can help you. Anybody that's working on your business can help, but your peers are your best source, right? They've done it. They've used people. They know who worked, didn't work, where there were mistakes. They're going to be your best advocates for somebody and be able to tell you exactly how it goes.
Awesome. We have another attendee who wants to ask about some of the earlier discussion about scaling your team. And she says, you talked about options earlier as packages for employees joining your team. What is a normal range of equity that you might give to your first 10 employees? What about after that as you grow?
That will depend on how senior the person is. I've seen some come on, general counsel, CFOs. There's some that come on and it's 1% to 3%. A critical hire, you'll bring in somebody at 5%. You have to remember down the line, if you're raising money, that investors are going to look at how much equity you gave out. But some of those initial hires can be just a few percent. I mean, some as low as 0.5%, but I would say, some of those positions would be 1 to 3. Someone with a more experience and critical job can be 5. I've seen some go up to 15. I haven't really seen anyone go much above that, unless you're talking about a co-founder or something that you're bringing in as a full-time complement to yourself.
And that's in addition to salary, or that's if they're coming in pre-seed funding?
That can be in addition to salary, but that salary may be very minimal. You certainly will find people who will come in just for options, and that's great. My experience is they tend to want some money. You'll have consultants come in that want a monthly retainer, but will take the rest in equity. So you're going to have to find the balance that works. And some people are okay without getting cash. If you can do it and you can do it all in options, great. But some people need that base bottom, pay their rent, whatever it is, that they need to be able to start working.
And so we're talking that when you say the 1 to 5%, that those are for people who are not partners, and that's does that number, that 1 to 5 bracket, change if they're coming in without salary?
Certainly, they all sort of scale. If you have less salary, you're going to probably give up more in options. If you're taking more in options, you can do less in salary. They move together. It's almost like you want to think about project what the value of those options could be in, whatever, 3-5 years, or make some projections. Obviously, at that point, they're just projections. It's the best you can do, but make some projections about what they're worth and combine that with a salary, and that's your target number. So if you're targeting $80,000 and you can only pay them $40,000, think about the value of those options and what would get them to that actual number. So it's sort of set your number and then find the mix that makes sense and what their risk tolerance is.
Cool. Okay, so let's think about the company down the line, or even when they're starting to fundraise. Let's talk about it from the legal perspective, some of the things that people should consider in that early stage.
Sure. Start by doing your diligence on your investors. Early conversations, you find a lot of founders feel overwhelmed. They're the VC, they know what they're talking about. I'm just going to listen. What can I say? I don't know what the terms are. Again, get a lawyer involved early. There are terms that end up in a term sheet that can be negotiated. Some are, you'll know what the market rate or market deal is for each one of those terms, but they can be negotiated and lawyers can help you one way or another. But don't expect that whatever the VC says is exactly what the terms have to be. Do your diligence. Ask your peers. People ask for referrals and references for those people that they've invested in and see what kind of investors they are. But get your lawyer in early to help you negotiate that term sheet. That term sheet is going to decide what the actual purchase agreement looks like. And so whether it's liquidation preferences or voting rights, you want to get those decided early on in your term sheet so there's some agreement, and then the purchase agreement basically replicates that. There's not a lot of negotiation after that point. Your lead investor will likely negotiate the terms. If you have smaller investors, they will follow on. If you have a number of investors that are about the same size, when you're early seed round, sometimes you have a few that are coming in all the same dollar amount or roughly the same dollar amount. Know that that's going to create a lot more negotiation. Everybody wants something different. So you need lawyers to help you sort through that, and that can be more complicated responding to each one. But it's a process. It's one that's diligence and legal heavy, and you're well served to have an advisor on that in that process.
Got it. Diana wanted to know, she says, Kate, please provide some suggestions for people starting out on a shoestring budget. I spent all my savings on building a website, trademark, self-publishing my books, all necessary as a professional speaker. Where to go to first for funding?
So, they say go friends and family, but I appreciate not everybody's friends and family is going to write a check for somebody. That just isn't the case for most people. There are ways to get loans. So small business loans are a great way to go. I think that gets you the capital to get off the ground. You can find small angel groups of women who are looking to invest in women, or angel groups that are, gender neutral, that are just investing. And you can find those and pitch angel groups. There are 37 angels. There are other angel groups that you can go pitch and find investors. And I think doing as much as you can to pitch is what's great. I've heard a few founders say, women struggle to get funding, but there's all these competitions and all over the place. And if women just keep going to do those competitions, they get funded. And that's a good place for them to start when they can't get traditional routes of funding. But I think a loan at the beginning is not about a small business loan is a good way to get yourself off the ground without somebody having to come in.
Got it. Yeah, and Diana, if you have any,
shoestring it as long as you possibly can. There are a lot of things that change as a business when you have investors come in. There's positives and negatives when you get the big dollars in, and managing those dollars is a challenge in and of itself, and responding to investors. So it's great that you're, bootstrap as long as you can. Be creative, go find competitions, go find angel groups, pitch where you can, a loan to get you off the ground. Keep it going as long as you can before you start looking for money.
Awesome. I would agree with that too. I think that bootstrapping is underrated in today's climate. Obviously it's not as glamorous, it doesn't make headlines, but oftentimes in order to get funding, you need to have shown that you can create traction without funding, right? So you need to be able to show those metrics and say, here we ran some tests, we've launched our MVP, and we got this much in users or impressions or revenue or whatever your key performance indicator is. And if you bring that to an investor, then you're saying, look at how much we did without investment, while we were bootstrapping it. Imagine how much more fuel to the fire we could add if we had your investment. So in that way, what you're showing is, investment is great and it's going to supercharge us, but we don't need it. And I always talk about female founders going into investor meetings that you should not be needy. There should never be an air of desperation saying, without this money, we can't do anything. Investors want to know that with or without them, this is going to be a success. And that's just even the psychology of pitching.
I think that's right. And I think you agree 100%. There's this spotlight on venture capital and the money flowing, but the truth is such a small percentage of companies actually get VC funding, and most of them are growing organically, but that's not what people are talking about, and that is difficult. But I think you should do it as long as possible, and you can grow organically. You can really work with small teams. You can be thrifty. Like you said, they're looking for traction in some way, shape, or form. They're not looking for it to be perfect. They're not looking for the big production. Just show traction in little ways, and that doesn't always mean you have to spend a ton of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely also just to put a plug in for equity crowdfunding, right? It's the whole point of it, is that the understanding that not everyone has rich friends and family, but everyone, hopefully has a community of some sort that they can leverage, whether it's their mom or their friend or their neighbor, and anyone can raise up to $1 million with as little investment as $10 a person. So really it's about, if you're building a valuable product, then you share it out. If people actually find value in it, that they can invest even just $10 to help you build your company.
And they feel part of the development. And so I think it's a great way. And depending on your product, if it's a consumer product that's something they totally understand, you'll get even more investment. Some of the harder, more technical based, you have to do a lot of explaining, but they're a great republic. There are a number of them that will help you do a great page, explain, and raise the money.
Yeah, awesome. So Kamiko wants to know, what is your experience in seeing CPGs funded by VCs? She has a wellness company and they produce a brand of kombucha.
I cannot say specifically for CPG products. I There are a number of VCs that focus, or most VCs have somebody that focuses on that area. I think it's a matter of doing the hard work and diligence and figuring out who that person in each VC that is focused on CPG products and being really specific about what they've invested in, see where other health foods like you have found investment, go find those folks. And there are people, I think for every type of industry, there's a VC that focuses, or there's a partner in a VC that focuses on that industry. And certainly if you find where your competitors have found dollars, you'll find more opportunity, because if they've done it once, they've done the diligence, they believe in the sector, they're just taking a bet. It doesn't, they're taking a bet on a team. They're already sold on the idea. So now they're just taking bets on the team. So if you've got the idea and you've got a great team, you're likely going to be able to raise as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would also say that that's also something that is part of your own diligence as you are starting the investment process. So even a quick Google search when you're putting up, top CPG venture capital firms, you're getting things like Brand Foundry, Excel Foods, Nutrition Greenhouse in the food and bev space. You're getting things like Next Level Ventures, Benchmark, First Round Capital. So it's really, I actually also talk about this in my fundraising course that I have. So if those of you who are interested in fundraising, go to lwleadership.com. We talk about how you actually set up your investor target list, so that you're not just, spraying and praying, as I say. When you're looking for investors, you're actually going in with a specific target and you're saying, okay, this person is bringing the right industry expertise. Sometimes geography matters, check size matters, stage of fund matters, what their actual value add is as an individual matters. So it's the same way how, when you're searching for a client or you're searching for a customer, you have your target market. The same way you need to have your target investors. So I would start out with simply going on crunchbase.com, finding CPG companies that have gotten investment, and then seeing who those investors are. There's Signal, I think it's Signal or nfx.signal, or just search NFX Signal, and then they have a database of investors. And then of course, if you're interested in learning more about going through the entire fundraising process, there's actually the fundraising course I put together, which is at lwleadership.com.
And I think and it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of a team, right? They're being sold on an idea, but mostly VCs say they're being sold on the team you've put together. And so really picking those people that are a cultural fit for you, that have the skills and experience you need, that makes sense, and that there's cohesion in that group, that's what they're looking for, is that a team can work together as a small group and bang it out and everybody take on roles. And early on, that's what they're looking for. But as you are looking for greater dollars, they really want to see that your functional heads, that sort of next layer, have very experienced people in those roles. And that becomes much more specialist as you go on. And one of the things I think is hard is when you start in that small team, you've got a bunch of generalists, and that's what they have to be. Everyone's wearing every hat. And as you start to grow, whether you're going to VC funding or not, you need specialists. And it becomes hard sometimes to look at your current group. They were there from the beginning, they're loyal, they've put in a ton of work, but they may not be the right person to fill some of these roles. And you find some startups and founders afraid to fire or let go because it's very personal, but they put people in roles that they're not qualified for. And it's not great for either party, right? You are unqualified and you're going to be frustrated and it's not going to work, and it's not great for the company. And that's a hard discussion to have with founders that I find myself having. You can't just keep them on and then hire the senior folks above them when you can't afford to hire everybody. But you can't just elevate them and hope that they're going to exceed in the role when they have no experience in that space. And so sometimes letting them move on, they're great at the next big startup and they're great as generalists and they're great on the ground, but they may not be your best person to run a department. And I think that's equally hard as hiring senior people. There are two things I find startup founders struggle with.
Awesome. We have another attendee who wants to know, for founders at the 50-50 split, are there any practical advantages to the CEO role versus other roles? For example, what type of person would you recommend having in the CEO role? Is it the visionary, anything is possible person, or the COO type analytical strategy person?
Honestly, I think it could be either. It depends on the organization. But this goes back to the whole discussion of moving from a founder to a CEO. And, the founder is the ideas person, and it's great to have vision, and you need that. And you need vision to engage your, the best high performing cultures are based on engaged teams. And if you want to engage your team, you got to have buy-in around your vision, and they've got to be motivated and committed and as passionate about that vision if you want them to outperform expectations. So having that vision, I think having that vision that you can talk to investors about, your strategic partners, your job is to sell your story and get people on board and committed to your story, whether internally or externally. So do I think that's an important role to play? And it's certainly part of the CEO role, certainly. But if you have to be able to add the other layers. And I've certainly seen founders that they can't add those CEO layers and they just are visionaries. And I think sometimes the best role for those is an executive chairman role, or if you're a tech person and that's what you're great at, then go be the tech person. You don't have to be the CEO, right? And sometimes that split happens because you're great at marketing. That's your strong suit, or tech. And so you bring in somebody to run the business. I do think it's important when you bring in COOs that you're very clear on roles. What happens sometimes is you get a CEO and a COO in a very small organization that doesn't need all those layers, and it becomes very confusing who reports to who and whose job and responsibilities are whose. So if you're going to step outside the CEO role and just let someone come in, call them a CEO, call them a president, call them a COO, and you're going to go do a discrete function, I think that makes sense. But I lean towards the better operational person makes sense as you're scaling, because you can have a visionary, be an advocate, can continue to be associated with the business or find a spot in the business. But that operations person is critical to building that team, building that strategy, and keeping the wheels moving, right? It becomes about capacity. Somebody once said becoming the CEO is moving on to some of the mundane things, but it is. It's processes and systems. It's making sure things are efficiently run, that you have the capability and capacity to grow and scale, that you have the people, that you're a manager and thinking about their personal growth and interacting and paying attention all the time. I think those characteristics and traits become very important as you're scaling.
Yeah, definitely. And I resonate with the not having overlapping skills, because I think that's really where the conflict comes in. And then I think the second thing being ego, right? Ego comes in with titles. It's always ironic when the business hasn't even taken off yet and both people have bought into an expectation of what the company could be. And the result is, I think if you as partners are already fighting over who is CEO or COO, or it's like contentious or it's uncomfortable of a discussion, you really need to ask yourself if that's the right partner to be building this with. Because I think at the early stage, you cannot have any ego in it. It has to be about the success of the company. It's like two parents and we're like, we're giving everything to the baby. We can't be deciding like who has more of the baby, especially if you're 50-50. Like you're both parents of it. So yeah, that's always the thing, that I've just learned and I've seen is that if there's even any hint of ego at this early stage, it's probably the wrong partnership.
Exactly. And that, as you're scaling and moving from that founder to CEO, it goes back to, is it your baby or your business? Like the achievements feel very personal. Like I did this, it's my business. At some point, you've got to put the benefit of the business before any one individual. And it has to be, the long-term value means focusing just on what's best for the business, which may not be great for you or your partner. I've seen companies where it's so clear that the founder shouldn't be the CEO, right? And but holds on for dear life because it's all ego. And I watched that just go right down into the ground, can't raise any funding. And you had VCs literally saying, we'll give you money if you step aside. And ego was so great that they wouldn't step aside and didn't get money, right? So at some point, you've got to let it go and make it about the business and not yourself. And I think that's that's part of that transition that's very difficult for founders.
Yeah. And also it's like, they say this and it can sound kind of cliche, but it's like 50% of nothing is still nothing. So it's like, I think what happens is, like, if you're an entrepreneur, you're probably someone who's optimistic, right? Like, thinks a lot about the future, is very visionary. So we like to think of like best case scenarios, like this could be $1 billion. And so before they've raised any funding, before any revenues in the door, before there's any users, it's almost like they're acting as if the company is already at $1 billion valuation when there's so much work to go.
And I think to your point about, when does it become a conflict? It's almost that thinking as well that gets them in trouble, right? 50% of nothing is just nothing, or I'm handing out options left, right, and center because they're worth nothing. All very true, and it seems like no big deal when you're going along. When all of a sudden you're valued at 500 million, the stakes are very different, and everybody's got something to say, and they have power, and the arguments become a lot greater. And so as you succeed, per se, those arguments become much more difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think this whole conversation is really about balance, and you're coming in from a perspective as a lawyer, right, who's seen the things go wrong. And so there's that balance of taking it seriously enough, like putting all the safeguards in place early on with the expectation that this will be big if you're putting all your energy in, but then at the same time not letting that ego come in as if it was already $1 billion company.
Agree. Yeah.
So another question from an attendee says, are roles just roles, or does the CEO actually have additional practical power that the other founder has additional practical power more than the other founder when you're at 50-50?
There is a difference. You can be 50-50. And again, it depends whether you're a corporation or an LLC. The rules are different. But, if you're 50-50 in a corporation and you own the same number of shares, right, you may put someone in place that's the CEO. Under Delaware law, the CEO has the power and authority to run the business. And so you as a founder are not making the same decisions. Unless, you may sit on the board and some decisions go to the board and then you'd have that say, and that's 50-50, and that's usually where big decisions are made. But when you're delegating something to the CEO, there is an expected set of authority and power that the CEO has on a day-to-day basis to run your business. It is why sometimes startups, for many reasons, other reasons, tax and structuring, liabilities, but choose LLCs because you can put whatever you want in an LLC agreement. So you can be as detailed as you want. If this is the decision, we make it together. If it's this decision, he decides. You can be as detailed or not detailed as you want to be, and as nuanced and particular to yourself. So some people really like an LLC agreement so that they can spell all of this out. But even then, like we said at the beginning, a managing member, the one who runs the day-to-day, has an enumerated list, whether you say it out, you enumerate it itself, which we suggest doing a bit of, or just say they have the power of a managing member, that is running the day-to-day. So if that's making a decision about, if you don't have protections in there, but hiring somebody, and it's a Delaware corporation and you're hiring somebody, that's an everyday role of a CEO. That doesn't need approval by everybody. So the 50-50 comes in if you're at a board level, but a CEO has their own powers.
Yeah, I'd be curious, because this is an anonymous attendee who's sharing these questions, if there's an actual 50-50 split that's going on and
with a problem.
With some tensions, or if this is just hypothetical as they're considering. Right. And we have, as a follow-up questions, what have you found is more appealing for investors, having the CEO be the optimistic visionary or the capable pessimist?
I say the visionary. Really because they've heard, in studying what's particular to women raising money, you hear this notion that men are asked the opportunistic and opportunity type questions and women are asked more of the defensive questions. And I don't know if that's one reason why a million men get more funding, but they are looking for the man that says, this is going to be $1 billion company. We're going to knock it out of the park. This is, whatever. And then the female comes in and says, well, here are all the risks and here's how I'm going to mitigate against those risks, but they exist. And I think that VCs respond better to the pie in the sky. They know they're going to do their own diligence. They're going to run their own numbers. Your numbers are just numbers. And at the end of the day, some of them are just throwing money at a wall and seeing what sticks. And so they want the biggest upside. They don't get a lot out of a smaller upside. It doesn't pay off their limited partners. And so I think, in my view, they like the big visionary at the beginning. They like to see bigger dollars, like to start to see a solid team. If you have, CMO, do you have a CFO, a COO, when you're talking later rounds. But I think at the beginning, they're looking for the visionary.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that those studies we've seen, across so many different outlets now, originally a study from Harvard Business School. But I do think that leading with the optimistic visionary is, how you have to be able to paint the picture as big as it can possibly be, but having the defensive questions, answers ready, because as women, we do get asked those questions. So that's always where I say you have to be very clear on your numbers. You have to be clear on your metrics, what you're tracking, what's going to indicate success for your company as you grow. What is your plan and your timeline? So the more detailed you can come, which is, I don't necessarily think it's a capable pessimist, but it's just capable and detailed. It's like you're leading with this big vision and then you're still saying, it's not just a vision. In fact, I've thought through all of this, and what people are really looking for is the thought process, right? Because you're going to be the person who's driving the plan and the execution of it down the road.
Exactly.
Cool. So we are at the 3 p.m. Eastern mark, or the noon Western Pacific time mark. Kate, this was a really engaging conversation. I think all the attendees learned a lot from it. So thank you so much for all of your insights.
Sure. Thank you for having me. And I've got a great piece on my website that's 5 strategies for scaling, if you'd like to check it out. The website's www.k8 Carney, CARNEY.com. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate and Lisa, for a super insightful discussion. This was one of my favorites to listen into as well. And just for everyone that attended, we will be sending around that link to Kate's website, the link that Lisa shared as well, and the recording to this session in the following couple of days here on the WomanMade community at helloalice.com. There's also a link to that in the chat if you want. And our next office hours will be in November. So all the links to register for that will also be in the WomanMade community. So you'll hear from us very shortly. And thank you both so much for a really, really great session.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.